All right. Well, I hope everybody's doing well. It's 12:05 here in Kansas City on a Wednesday. And today we're going to talk about reporting. And we're going to talk about two things. Why bullies don't care if you report. And in some ways, when you report, it solidifies their bullying. And secondly, I think the other thing that's super important when we think about bullying is there's a way to do it, a right way, and yeah, that's right. I'm going to say a wrong way. And when you're the person being bullied, when you're the one who is receiving all the abuse and everybody is coming after you, what you think is going to happen when you report is you think that somebody's going to take you seriously. You think somebody is going to listen to what it is that you have to say about your bully and that somebody is going to stop it. That's what you think. Now, unfortunately, what we know to be true is that when you report bullying, if you're the one being victimized, is that it's exactly opposite what I just said. So, logically and rationally, when you report bullying, somebody should intervene and stop workplace abuse. That almost never happens. It's the same thing with discrimination, harassment, anything else in the workplace, is that what we think happens doesn't. In fact, it's almost always when you report, nothing happens and the bullying gets worse. And that's because, so if you think your bully cares or gives two rats, you know what, that you're reporting them, they don't. In fact, they expect that. They don't care. And why is that? Why do they both expect you to report and maybe in some ways even want you to do it? And that's because they've been working very hard at creating a narrative in their world where you're the problem, not them. So first off, they know you're going to do it because bullies are not, just acting randomly. They're behaving in a way that they know is unacceptable because people have actually called them out before. This isn't their first rodeo. They are just in a workplace that tolerates this kind of thing. So they know what they're doing is wrong. They know it's not okay in the workplace. But the other thing, and the most important thing that you have to consider when you're reporting is, have they been to the person you're going to report to? So let's say, for example, it's your boss is your bully. Okay. Well, one of the things we know about bosses and bullies is they have relationships with people in human resources. And those relationships often center around hiring and firing, that kind of thing. What can they do? What can't they do? That sort of thing. So bullies, if your boss is your bully, again, I'm just going to use for a generic term, Bob the bully. So Bob is your boss. Bob is your bully. Bob's been at the company for a while, has a relationship hiring people in the company with HR. HR generally helps with those things. Yes, they say you can do this, you can't do that. So your boss has a relationship with HR, period. Okay? And Bob also complains about you to HR. So that's one of the things that we don't think about when it comes to reporting and bullies, is that you think that they're not complaining about you because you're not doing anything wrong. You're not doing the bullying. You're the victim. But what they're doing is cultivating a narrative around you being the problem. And in order for their narrative to take a foothold in the organization, They have to talk to HR about you, and they don't care if it's true. So they've already been to the person you are going to report to. That person has bias about you. They already have opinions, if you want to use that term, about what they think about you and who they think you are. And also, the other thing that we don't think about oftentimes, but is very true, is Bob isn't just bullying you, he's also bullying them and intimidating them and creating fear in them. And most people don't know how to respond to bullying. And so those relationships that they're cultivating, Bob the bully with HR, okay, makes a difference when you come in to make a report about Bob. So they don't care. In fact, what Bob would like you to do is actually go in to make HR and make the report, because then it confirms what he's saying to HR about you, that you don't know how to respond to criticism or feedback in meetings. And then you go into HR and say, Bob, he's, negatively, criticizing me and putting me down and humiliating me in public, and that's impacting my work. So in HR's mind, it's saying, oh, Bob said, Jan can't accept criticism. Jan's now saying I can't accept criticism because Bob's criticizing me, and it confirms what Bob has said. So you're solidifying the narrative about you when you go into report. Okay, so Bob and bullies are skilled manipulators. They seem like nice people, like they're telling the truth, they're authentic, and people have a tendency to believe them. Not just them, but oftentimes what happens is you have other people in your organization, your bystanders, your colleagues, who want to get ahead in the workplace. They want to get promoted over you. They want to get the raise or the sales bonus, or the better teaching position or the better teaching, classes. And so they go along with what Bob says in order to get Bob to give them what they want. So they're playing the long game. So they've also gone into HR. And so when HR goes out, and I'm going to use this term extremely loosely because it almost never happens, and it never happens in a way around bullying that it should, investigates, and they go to other people, and everybody in your organization says, yeah, Jan is the problem, then HR says Jan is the problem. Okay? And so you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You're damned before you even go into report. Okay? And it doesn't threaten their power. Okay? If your boss is your bully, they're not going to lose that leadership position as a result of that. Okay? So you're no threat to them. Okay? And so again, what it means is there are significant risks for you when you go into report, and you better think about those things ahead of time. And so you have to ask yourself, and this is a question across the board. I don't care who you are. I don't care if your boss is the bully or not. A question that you should be asking every time you're thinking about reporting workplace bullying is, if this goes bad, can I withstand more bullying if the bullying increases? Because that's almost always what happens. Okay, so there's going to be pushback. There's going to be retaliation. So in fact, one time when I reported, HR started bullying me. Okay, so again, it added on just another layer of bullying. Right? First it was my colleagues, then it was my supervisor, then it was my supervisor's supervisor, then it was HR, and it just went up the chain of command. So you have to ask yourself, can I handle it emotionally? Can I handle it work-wise? And if the answer is no, then it's okay to step back and not report. Okay? And the other thing is how do I report? That's the thing. So what you should do first is Assess the relationships with HR. Assess the relationships between you and the person you're going to report to, and assess the relationship between the bully and those people you're going to report to. Okay, now that might be a little bit harder to do if you're disconnected from HR, but use some investigative tools and figure out what that relationship is. I think it's worth doing that. And the other thing I think is how and what you say when you report matters. And again, I know this is going to be, you're going to be like, oh, well, good Lord, we've heard this before, Jan. You need evidence. You can't just go in there with no evidence that corroborates what you're saying. You need solid evidence, and that requires you to collect evidence, emails, you have to take field notes and documentation. You have to get some idea from a research standpoint, a baseline of what's happening to you. When's it happening? Where is it happening? Who's doing it? All of those. What types of bullying are you experiencing? Okay, because when you go into HR, you are not just reporting. Okay, what you are doing is you are telling your story to HR about being bullied in their organization, and what you want them to do is to feel what that feels like. You want them to know what it's like to be in a meeting where you have 10 people in there and Bob is yelling at you and nobody is saying anything, and you feel like you just wish you could, be enveloped into the wall. You want to disappear into the wall because it's so embarrassing. But how do you tell that? Well, here's a couple of mistakes that people make. First off, you don't collect evidence. Okay, you don't collect evidence, and writing it down isn't enough. So document, okay, collect evidence, and keep field notes. Okay, and field notes are just you writing down your story right after or soon after it happens. Okay, and you can make this as painless as possible. If you don't want to document forever, nobody is saying that you have to do that. So for example, let me walk you through you're deciding you want to report, okay? And so you've decided you have had it with Bob. You're tired, you're exhausted. You want to be able to come into the workplace, feel valued and supported, and at the very least, you want to be able to do your job without being humiliated and shamed and treated like crap, okay? I don't think that's too much to ask. And so you decide that you're going to go in and talk to human resources, okay? The first thing you need to do is you need to figure out when is the bullying happening, how often, what type of bullying it is, and who is doing it. And for this, we're just going to say you have one bully, and that bully is Bob, okay? So normally what you would do when you go into report is you generally report the last incident, okay? And I know I was 100% guilty of this. I report what happened yesterday, or I report what happened a week ago. Well, that's not bullying. That is a separate incident of abuse. Bullying is a period of time where bad behavior has been geared towards you. It's directed at you over a period of time, and it's more than one type, okay? Generally, you have onlookers or bystanders who are keeping their mouth shut, or even worse, participating in it. So your first mistake is not having clear evidence of when it started and how long it's been happening. But let's say you don't even want to do that. You just want to report the last 3 weeks, okay? So before you go into the reporting, you, for 3 weeks, collect evidence and write down what's happening. And if you don't even want to write down details, fine. You just mark and tally when did it happen, okay? You can have, date and time, who did it, write down their name, and then just write yelled at, cursed at, cyber humiliation, email, whatever it is. And then just tally how often those things are happening and where they're happening and who's doing it, okay? And the reason I tell you to do that is, again, because bullying and workplace abuse is a pattern, okay, that happens over time, okay? And it's multiple sources of abuse. Generally, there's gaslighting, some verbal assaults, whatever it is, okay, cyberbullying. It's a mix and match of bullying geared towards you, directed at you again. So, and the reason that's so important is because you can then say, when you go in to talk to HR, when you go into HR, instead of saying, Bob is interrupting me in meetings, what you can say is, I have collected evidence, and in the last 3 weeks, in our team meetings, in front of all of my colleagues, Bob has interrupted me 10 times and not allowed me to complete my report. Here's the kicker, which has impacted the overall functioning of the team. Okay? You see then where you have evidence to show where it's happening, how many times, okay? That's evidence and data to back up. It's not a one-off. Bob has done this so many times in the last team meetings, okay? And you want to paint a clear, very clear picture of what exactly Bob is doing. Because if you say Bob is yelling at me, and versus Bob has yelled at me 10 times in the last 3 team meetings, and he has said, Jan, you're a real piece of work. He said, Jan, you're a lazy, you know what. He said, Jan, you're this, right? And you can verbatim show and say what Bob has said to you. That paints and tells a story versus Bob is bullying me. Okay? And the other thing is, again, and you might even weave in questions like this to HR. How would you feel if that happened? What if that was you? How would you respond? What would you do in that situation? And then you get them to become part of your story, so that they can see and react in the moment to what it is that you're telling them. So, and the key piece is having numbers, okay, frequencies, totals, summaries to show how often it's happening. The other thing that's super important, and I hope you picked up on this, is that it's very likely when you report to HR, they do have confirmation in my side bias. They do already think that you're the problem. And so they have zero sympathy. They have zero empathy for you. Zero. And if they're being bullied, they could care less because nobody is doing a damn thing about Bob bullying them. Why should they intervene when Bob is bullying you? Okay? But here's where HR does care. They don't care about you. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. They didn't care about me, but they cared about the overall perception of what people think about the company. So when you take it away from Bob is bullying me and I'm not able to do my job, okay, which is a green light, frankly, for HR to fire you, you can say, Bob, in the last 5 team meetings, Bob has interrupted me 25 times. As a result of that, I have not been able to yet to this date present my budget to the entire team, which is affecting spending, which will hurt the company the company's bottom line. Okay? So you're not making it about you, you're making it about the company and the organization. And HR's likelihood to take you more seriously increases. Okay? And that's what you want to do, is you want to tell your story in a way to get as many people in the company and organization to believe you and to understand you. And this is the other thing. Okay? And this is another thing that I'm going to say, do as I say, not as I did. Because if you respond to Bob and you, again, mimic Bob's behavior back, so Bob interrupts you in meetings and you interrupt Bob, okay? And you can see where this is kind of going, is that when you do that, and I'm just going to deem it both of those things, whether I'm doing it or Bob's doing it, is unprofessional in the workplace. But when you're doing it, there's a double standard again, and you can't engage in that kind of stuff. And the other reason it's so bad is because everybody in the organization is not saying Bob's interrupting you. They're saying you're interrupting Bob. So when you then go to HR and HR says, hey, Jan, well, Bob has said you interrupted him several times. Is that true? Then then do I lie, or am I honest? So when your behavior, and you've taken the higher ground, which yes, I get is difficult and problematic, and yeah, we make mistakes and we snap sometimes, but the more strategy and responses to Bob's bullying that are professional, that shut it down, like microscripts, all those sorts of things make you look better. And when you go in then to make your report, it is easier for you to report Bob's bad behavior when your behavior has been, for the most part, above average. Okay? And so what I recommend, and I know people, I know this can be problematic, is to role play, which I personally am not a huge fan of role playing, but it's very effective when you are going in to something like HR or your supervisor to report bullying. It 100% helps you make your case and tell your story in a way that people can better understand it. And that person you're role playing with can give some questions to see how you might respond. Okay? So it's very important to think about the meeting and what you're going to say before you actually go in there. Because if HR or your supervisor is really doing their job, then they should have some questions for you that you can easily answer to help build and make your case. And the other thing I recommend is that if you have evidence, so let's say, for example, let's go back to the example where Bob's interrupting you in meetings and you haven't been able to present your budget report because Bob keeps interrupting you. The evidence that you have that actually supports that example is, if you go back to your meeting agendas, of course, assuming that meeting agendas are a thing. I mean, maybe it's not anymore. But you have added presentation of the budget for the last 5 meetings, you can show that to HR that says, look, HR, I have had to add the budget report to every meeting because I have not had an opportunity to do that, right? That's your evidence. So not only do you want to have the actual numbers to show where the bullying is happening, 10 versus I'm being bullied, you also want to have as much corroborating evidence as you possibly can. Okay. And so then you don't have to rely on yourself. You can show HR the facts. Now, the other thing that HR doesn't want to look at, and that's your field notes or documentation or your evidence. Okay. And I get that. If you have been in a place for a long time, you might have a lot of evidence. But I would recommend that instead of saying, hey, here's my 20-pound, notebooks with my evidence in it, is you provide summaries, right? Again, Bob has bullied me this much, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the effect of that. Again, tying it back to the organization and saying, again, if you're saying Bob has interrupted me in meetings, and again, what I would say is evidence to corroborate, so that they see that everything in your timeline, you have evidence to corroborate what they say. And don't give them your evidence. Only copies of your evidence. So because once you have a document or evidence in its, like if you have a paper copy of something, you want to make a copy of that paper versus giving them the original to keep your evidence, secure. But how you present it makes a difference. And so don't think your bully cares at all if you go into report, because it often bolsters what they're saying about you and it makes them more powerful. It doesn't weaken them. But how you do it can make a huge difference in the outcome. And this is my final thing, is a lot of times HR, they don't know what to do. So you might suggest, again, going back to the Bob is interrupting me example, you might go back to that and say, what I would like is for our team meetings that we have so-and-so run the meetings versus Bob, right? So that when you go into report, because they might not know what to do, what you're doing is bringing in the actual solutions so that they can then, yes, take credit for it, but that you have given them some meat to chew on to try to stop the bullying. Okay, because HR, sometimes their hands are tied, sometimes they're being bullied, but also lots of times they just don't know what to do. And there are lots of, I'm not going to say simple, but easy ways to stop workplace bullying if if people implemented things. Okay, and maybe we can talk about that at another time. But I think I'm going to wrap it up for today. But if you have any questions about reporting, please email me at jan@stopbullyculture.com. I'm happy to help you with bullying. If you want to talk about it or even role play, just let me know. And the other thing, again, I have started a podcast, Exposing Workplace Bullying, which we will talk more about reporting on that episode. So if you haven't subscribed or aren't following it, please do. And I'll be doing a deeper dive into reporting and the nuts and bolts of that on that episode. So again, if you need anything, again, I have a lot of resources on shop.stopbullyculture.com. And otherwise, I will see you next week.